Well, Thomas, over our years of having conversations, we've spoken from many different situations, but this week is the first time I've been speaking to you in quarantine. And I think many people are curious and a little scared and maybe interested to hear what you're perceiving and noticing from this isolation.
Mm. Yes. First of all, yes, I'm as a returning traveler from the US to Israel. I needed to go into 14 days of quarantine, not because I have any symptoms, but as a kind of regulation of the Israel government. And that gives me also some some space and time to really tune in with and also look at deeply at the current situation that is quickly emerging into kind of a global pandemic situation. And I think that this is a very important time. Like, it's a very important time because it's potentially disruptive health-wise for many people in a often dangerous way. It's disruptive economically. It's for many people also existentially scary. And I think I would love also in this conversation to really look at, maybe let's start like at multiple topics, but first, that what does it mean for me or for us, for all of us as human beings, before we jump into big systemic philosophical conversations? We all have feelings, we all have an experience. We all maybe might have families and family members that we are concerned about, especially also the elderly generation in our family, like how, people that are more vulnerable to a virus disease now. And so and then there are levels of concern that ripple out from that. And so I think the first question is, like, how can I apply my inner practice, my spiritual practice right now when it's really needed? And that the whole contemplative inner spaciousness, awareness, our witnessing, our non-dissociated witnessing capacity, but also the humanness of having feelings. Because I believe the fact that fears come up, that all kinds of emotions come up, is actually part of the situation and not a disruption within the situation. I mean, sometimes fear can really overwhelm us, and I'm not saying we should drown in fear, but what I'm saying is that suppressing our fears doesn't make us more effective. And so, like, the inner practice, as we, practiced for many, many years, or as humanity for many thousands of years, gives us more inner stability and presence to have those feelings, to not cut myself off, and also integrate what comes up in me into kind of a developmental step. And I think that's a very important practice, because then I see, oh, I can really stay vulnerable. Because if I lose my vulnerability, I know I'm actually defending myself against the level of emotions that I go through. And if I feel that I'm overwhelmed alone to deal with my emotions, then I need connection. I need to talk to you, Terry, and tell you, yeah, I'm afraid, I'm this, that's going on for me. And you can tell me what you feel. And then together we create a relational resourcing for each other. And I think that's why community building is also important right now, or community resources, that we don't have to deal with it alone. And we all know how supportive it is to talk to friends, to talk to Sangha members, to talk to, family members, and to hear each other, to also listen to them. And I think when we create this listening and sharing surface, or system for each other, then we can stay human. And somehow it's also like staying in this heart synchronization, or open on the heart level, I think is really what we need right now, also in order to make the best decisions. Because we might take decisions out of overwhelm,
Yes.
and then we actually see later, wow, we are paying a price for those decisions because I didn't make them out of my inner connection, intuition, and self-contact. I actually was afraid and I did something quickly, but actually, no, this is not the wisest decision. So how to stay in a place of making wise decisions within a real challenge, but a challenge also that brings up a lot of collective ghosts as well. So there might be,
which is such an important topic for us to explore today. I'm excited. I've been reflecting on a couple of things. One of them being that I want to be friendly to the frightened or confused inner mammal, the little, the puppy of the limbic response. And it's understandable. It's fine. It's not a problem that comes up. And I want to relate to that in myself and in others, like a good parent who can do both mothering and fathering, who can be friendly but not hijacked, firm with some wisdom. And I also want to take into account something that I think is, like, we're doing this virtually and we're safe. You will not infect me or I you. And yet very often people say, oh, I have too much time on my computer, the virtual contact isn't good enough. They see it as a glass half empty sometimes. And yet it is also a glass half full. All the psychological studies show that we thrive on social contact, even on physical touch is important. It sets all kinds of cascades of endorphins and oxytocin and dopamine flowing in our systems. And this deep and affectionate and friendly contact and really listening and really receiving one another is something we can do in this virtual format and actually need to do during a time when more of our relating is going to be mediated by computers and the internet and telephone lines.
Yeah, that's very powerful. And also what you're saying, that I feel you right now and I feel how you feel me right now, means that there is a relational energetic transmission between the two of us. And that intimacy that creates is also easily possible virtually. We can establish a very supportive field and conversation, like on a virtual level. And I think if that's what the times call for right now, and if that's what we have to do in order to prevent the spreading of a virus or to, keep family members safe, and so I believe a lot of closeness can be exchanged like that. And also a lot of supportive relations. We can call people, especially also, maybe people that work in the healthcare system and just need to have somebody where they can cry because they're so stressed, or they have seen so many things, or they expose themselves, they risk their own lives sometimes to save other people. And I think we can contribute in various levels when we have time, resources, competencies. Just sometimes an open heart is a great competency. I don't need to have a special skill to listen to somebody that's stressed, and so I think what you said is very important, that we see, at least for some time, I think the virtual media and the relational competence, so that I feel you, I feel your body, I feel your emotions, I'm with you intellectually, we are connected. I think that's, like, the virtual media is very good for that too. And also in all our online classes, we have so much intimacy and so many healing processes. So I think that's great for this time. And then actually the technology is a real blessing right now in order to help us to stay related, not to be isolated. I'm also in kind of a quarantine, but I don't feel I'm isolated, because I can relate to many people in that way. And I think that's important also for many people that are not used to be alone so long or to be kind of isolated. It can be a very scary process, especially if I'm not trained in that or if I didn't, have more experience with that. So if we know some other people are quarantined or they are isolated somewhere, or maybe elderly people that don't want to go out, so that we keep the social contact going, because that's what allows information and energy, as you said, to flow. And every one of us can think, what can I do to improve the life of somebody through like a lovely moment of relating.
I'm feeling very touched by this constructive orientation in the context of some of the really difficult parts of what we're dealing with. We know we're dealing with the challenges of maybe being afraid of getting sick and being afraid of losing money and maybe not being able to weather the storm and maintain our lifestyle. But the fact that social isolation leads to depression and worse health outcomes and even more susceptibility to illness is paradoxically related to the fact that we need to do some social distancing for a while to stop the spread of the virus. Mm-hmm. So there is a sense of the poignant vulnerability of so many people who might become isolated or depressed, and how we can reach out. Like with this, we're planning to make this available for free, and hopefully it'll be a resource for people. But maybe there are many of us who can reach out to family, friends, neighbors, people we know who we think might be isolated, and be a source for their well-being. And this also relates to some of these bigger themes that you and I plan to talk about that are more systemic. That the simple goodness that shows up in care for another human being is the most embodied and intimate and basic unit of the gestures we want to make to be of help to our larger hurting world.
Yeah, and that's why I said the humanness, because sometimes in our daily, because at the end of the day, like, relation is really what nourishes us. Most probably is one of the most, besides spirit, as like relation is what nourishes us in a way on a human level the most. And I think if we manage within a crisis to create meaningful relational networks where we are supportive of each other, yes, maybe some things we will lose. That's part of it. But I think there's something about supportive networks that have an intelligence, mm-hmm. and that's also a way how to navigate through a more difficult time. And I think if the people that can offer whatever we can offer to other people that really need it in this time, that's a planetary call for collaboration. That's what we are in. Like, these moments show us how intelligent we are as humanity. And I think if we can really get this intelligence going, then it's a really good sign. That's a really good evolutionary certificate that we can get going through this kind of evolutionary exam. Where do we get really regressive? Or where do we actually contribute to coherence, stabilization, care, compassion? And I'm sure that everybody finds something to give. And maybe everybody finds somebody that can give something back, even if it's something else. And that data flow, like in Europe, in Turkey, and the whole refugee situation there, is just a sign of something that's most probably gonna happen more often in the future. So the capacity to be actually trained to be in unknown situations is super important. and the resilience that we can develop together and understand resilience and the building blocks of kind of cultural resilience, and how we are all intelligent aspects of that cultural resilience. We just need to use it. We have it. Everybody
Mm.
has it. Everybody has something to contribute, and everybody at times needs something. And so if that really works well, we as humanity can go through crisis pretty well. But it's something I think that we need to all, the more of us participate, the better it is.
It's also important that we have a kind of radical compassion and acceptance of the fact that although the crisis brings out the very best in many, 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 many people, it also brings out the worst sometimes in people, at least for a time. And if we are assaulted if physically would, really be bad, but even with nasty comments online or the various ways in which people can be unkind and even, violent, some world leaders are not being very wise, and the ways in which we can feel threatened by other human beings, we can make that an exception and not be as resilient in the face of it. So this sense that there's a little battle in the heart of every human being between what's healthiest and what's unhealthy, and that some people will may need to distance from them or parry them or not give them our attention or even oppose them at times. And we have to find a way to be with that in a way that doesn't drop us down into that mind of separation and us and them and the demonizing of the other, that reduces our health, and that somehow our way of relating to one another can build our capacity to have that kind of understanding and bigger hearted view.
Yeah, right. Because I think we will see, like, that panic can drive us human beings to do many odd things too. And I think to be aware of that and how we hold it in each other, that we see some actions arise out of a deep tightness inside or out of a deep existential fear inside is important, and that we sometimes look without collaborating with the things that are not okay. We can be very clear with what we don't support or what's not okay, what really needs to be confronted, and still see underneath the surface as well. I think it's not one or the other, it's both together. And otherwise it becomes fluffy and like a spiritual concept that, okay, how do I hold everybody? Even if I completely disagree with something, I don't say anything because now I need to hold that person. But there is a fine line between being in a place of leadership and also, maybe many of us that haven't been in positions of leadership in this time can take some leadership somewhere and create something. Like the fact that things are falling apart maybe doesn't mean that we cannot build something at the same time. So that I really listen to what are my capacities, where can I contribute, where is it really needed, not where I need to contribute, but where is it really needed, and then really be in this place of compassion and leadership and clarity. I think that's as you said, that's a very important call in this time. And also to notice when my stress levels are going up and my fear is going up, and then yours too, and then you tell me something that's even more scary than what I've heard, and then I get even more anxious, and then we go together up, so that more and more we notice, okay, that's how it can happen. Or we can both of us can take a breath, notice that we are getting really stressed and scared, like regulate that a bit in ourselves, and then come back into like a conversation. And I think through small practices that are around, that many of us already practiced, also most probably for many years, that's a real advantage. That's if I'm not just identified with my fears, but if I can witness my fears and feel them or other emotions. So I think that's a really good thing. And And it seems also that there's a natural amount of fear that comes with a potentially life-threatening illness, and I think that's what many people experience. And then there's on top of it kind of a charge of collective panic. And I believe we're also seeing the undigested ghosts of our past collective trauma being reawakened with a new collective trauma potentially. And I think we need to be aware of it, that the past can have a lot of power. But by digesting my portion of the past, I actually help myself, and maybe also a little bit the whole, to ground itself more. And I think if you do it, and if millions of people do that, then we stay in a grounded place. And I think that's where we want to respond from in times like this.
Although it's people who have been paying attention to your work or my work have some awareness of the residual collective traumas that are reactivated by current fears, and a sense of this as a ground, a place for practice. But a lot of people haven't been exposed to that, and it may very well be that that a sign of new awareness will be that they notice, gee, this is out of proportion with the realities, but I'm feeling something activated in me, and what is this? And it may be very important that, although we want to make a distinction and be more resourceful, that we relate to the people who are activated with an appreciation that, in a way, their activation is an expression of their awareness. And obviously, it's just a half step. It's the beginning of something that needs to become integrated. And there's something to offer, but a kind of respectful appreciation for what's arising in the disturbance around us, I think, is the beginning of meeting it in an authentic way. We might jump a little too quick to trying to counter it. And if it hasn't been met and received fully, we won't really have access to be of help, I don't think.
Right, and to our own activation as well, yeah. And I think if that really works well, yeah, it's a learning process. And I think in this kind of times, we are all learning something. We are learning more about ourselves. We are learning more about our friends, our family members. We are learning more about the culture, and it might bring us multiple times to the limits of what we can still process well, and where is the end of our conscious universe in a way. Yeah, but I think that's also what the times call for, that we stay in a process of learning. That I see in uncertain times, it's not that I will always know what to do, and it's also maybe not wise to look what's the solution, but what's actually the next doable step. And that we support each other, not to reach too far out and then end up in a paralysis, but actually, what can I do that is doable, that I can still feel as the next reasonable step? And then from there, I make the next reasonable step, because many things are uncertain and changing a lot. And I can also learn a lot about myself when things are changing that I cannot control. Because control is for many of us, a very important function, to control my fear and my emotional environment. And when that gets challenged, then I might get really afraid, because I can't control where my life's going. And it doesn't mean that I don't participate, but many things are uncertain. So my relation to uncertainty and change is a very important aspect as well. And as I said, I think it's very important to see that some people are really in severe health crisis, or they are maybe in severe existential crisis with their business. And for some people, for some of us, it's really it's a big thing, and that we are mindful of this. That even if I'm personally right now not affected in that way, but some people might, and that I don't project my own reality onto them, but I really listen to them and what they really need is kind of important. And I think it comes back again and again. One important part is always that I can see if I'm still in a state of vulnerability, like a felt connection to what's happening. And if not, that I notice that at least, and that I see what I need to come back to that.
You know, as our conversation is proceeding, I'm remembering some things we just talked about privately a few days ago that are more systemic and abstract and big picture. And I don't really want to abandon this. I want it to stay a conversation about practice and our own resources and our own wisdom. But I think in relation to the fact that we're all given an ability to imagine the whole and imagine the bigger systems and the flows of things. And, you know, for many of us, the coronavirus crisis kind of rhymes with the greater ecological crisis and the global warming and all of the issues that are, you know, the unsustainability of the trajectory of human civilization. And I mentioned to you that I've done some advisory work with the relational side of the Extinction Rebellion movement that originated in the UK. And we were reflecting on the fact that in a time like this, we realize how important it is for us that the social systems be intact. We don't want to break them up and have social disorder at all. That's the worst thing at a time like this. And so attitudes like rebellion have to be integrated. It may be true that the system is tending to be a blind machine of more and that it is unsustainable and it needs to change rapidly, but we want it to be healthy and to continue to hold all the vulnerable human beings, even while it makes rapid adaptation to a new way of being. Right. And just tearing it down. This is one of the reasons I think that in American politics, recently, Bernie Sanders supporters of losing elections because his attitude of revolution, although very much what younger people resonated with, older people didn't want to see things breaking up. And so there's this more conservative motion, and something about integrating both the radicality and the conservation of the health of the forms is being illustrated now in a really deep way. And you had some very interesting responses to this.
It's good to look where I am. It's easier to talk about the system. Where does this put me? Like the one that talks about the system. And it's an interesting question. Like, experientially, where am I? So there is the system. And it's a word that's often being used, the system. But where does it put me when I talk about it that way? And I think if I go deeper, I'll see, because I believe in real maturity, like in an integrated, mature self, I'm always a part of that system. I'm never outside of the system. I might maybe not agree with certain ways how the system works. I might bring in corrective ideas into the system, but nobody is outside of the system. Who is outside of his nervous system? You know, we are all in it. We are all in a human body. We are all we are all often using a lot of facilities of the system that we criticize. You know, when some people say, yeah, it's so critical with the oil companies. And then we ask them, well, how did you come to here? And say, yeah, with my car. Great. So where's the oil system? No, like if you never use anything that's being built by oil, out of oil, and it's even more than, even if I don't use it, I'm still part of the system. I'm still breathing the same air. Maybe I'm not part of the same thought process fully. I maybe feel things differently, but that doesn't make me not the system. And I think because the important question is there a way of a growth that is not anymore part of the pattern of that polarization between being quiet and shutting up and being totally adapted to a system that might be dangerous? And the other thing is, the other option is tearing it down, because it seems like we are building a better system. And history has proven over and over again that the better system didn't turn out always to be the better system, or it took a long time to take care of the wounds and the collateral damage that it created to do that. But between this, like the polarization between me and the system, or my ideology and the system, is like, where is this two-ness coming from? And I think like interdependence is a very interesting experience, that actually the air that I'm breathing makes me all the time interdependent with the planetary system. And I'm part, you affect me right now, and I affect you anyway. You know, we affect each other, and countries affect each other, and leaders affect countries and each other. So there's a, even if I'm not always aware of all the subtlety of it, you know, who Googles, you know, when you type something into a Google search, how often do you end up with the line number 5 on page 3576? Most probably not that often, that you really make it to scroll down and you go through to page 3576. That's where in our consciousness many things are happening that we don't feel. But we never scroll there. You know, technology is a copy-paste of our internal nervous system. It's like we didn't build something that is completely independent of us. We just copy-pasted our interiority outside, and now we call it high-tech. But the fact that in the Google search, many things come up, they happen in us too. Many things that are happening right now in the world, they are happening in there somewhere. But if I didn't train it or practice it, or if nobody showed it to me, then I don't have access to it. But there are some people that have access to a lot of that. And so what I'm saying is that the interconnectedness and interdependence, it's easy to put myself outside of the system and try to fix it from the outside. I will show how the system can be better. Then it induces the feeling as if I wasn't part of it, or I'm not part of it. But if I'm an integral part of the system, then the high level of relational clarity, relational compassion, relational engagement, participation is much more challenging, but much more true. Because nobody is ever outside of the system. It's in fact, that's why also many of the revolutions didn't work in the past, because people just put themselves there instead of the former system. And then it kept on creating this kind of polarization. And I think it's going to be very interesting to look, how can I fully be part of it? And even if it scares me right now, like I'm really part of a global situation. Whatever I can contribute at the moment to that global situation is called for. And that's true for climate change. And many people that really have a lot to give, and all the people that are experts, and all the people that really, you know, put a lot of their time into research and really finding new ways, fantastic. You know, but we are all part of that system. We are all part of it. And what is important is that we see the part of the system that like is lost the relational capacity, where we ourselves, or we see elevation, that suddenly some people think just because they have more power, they have more money, they have a better status, like we are not anymore on eye level. And if that happens in a society, That's a thing, because if we step out of the heart coherence, that happened through staying human. We're all bowing down to the same life, to
Yeah.
the same essence of life. And it doesn't matter how much wealth we have, how much political or organizational power we have. If we start to elevate ourselves, that's a thing. And we are called back into, we are all interdependent. And sometimes in crisis, the social fabric, we need each other. That's why we cling together. That's the tribal trauma response. But
Right.
there's also something else that is a corrective that can open up our compassion, and that we come back into a state of, humility with each other. And I think that's very, very important. And then how do we, let go of the structures in society that are really not anymore serving, because they created a kind of a stagnation, and evolution cannot happen, or life is really calling us for new structures. That's important. Of course we want to work for this. I'm just always looking, where does the impulse come from that wants that? And I think that's what everybody needs to ask him or herself, the intention question.
It's true. Some of the very same ideas that are a natural expression of my care and my generosity and my courage and my insight, I could come to from the place of my separating myself and doing in a critique and feeling like the other has the problem. Because your analysis can have intelligence even if it's rooted in a dissociated stance. So I think that this crisis has pressed pause. And I had an interesting conversation with the philosopher Peter Russell a couple of weeks ago, in which he asserted something very interesting. He was saying that the streams of causes and effect in our minds are so strong that the only real choice, he was arguing, that we ever have is to press pause, to just pause and let the spaciousness and reality of what is refresh and wash us, free and clean. And on a large scale level, the whole world is being forced into a time of pause. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people will be glued to the cable TV, which is jangling the nervous system, and it won't really function as a pause if we relate to it that way. But maybe it's a grace, too.
Yeah, I think it's always important to look at what part of the whole situation we're speaking to. For somebody that is in the intensive care unit somewhere, it doesn't seem like a grace, and then
not at all. Yeah,
to notice that. And I know that's not what you're speaking about, but it's important because some people speak a lot about spiritual things that are not connected to the real embodied effect. And but if we say that that's important and that's very true at the moment, like the real crisis for some people or for many people, then what I also think and feel is that that we see often in the mystical knowledge or in the healing of individuals or cultures, we talk a lot about the vessel, like a cup, and the energy, like the experience of the cup. And I think what we see in the world is sometimes that we are a bit ahead of what we can ground. Like that the roots need to grow in order to let the tree grow. Otherwise, when there is a wind, the tree is not stable and can fall over. And I think that's also what we see in the global growth. Sometimes we try to, in economy, in technology, in many things, even in our personal growth, we want the extra shot of getting a little bit more excitement and experience more than to be able to ground it and to grow our ethical skill or ethical interior or line of intelligence. And so when 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 the growth is actually based on fear, that I'm running faster because when I stop I really get scared, then that fear might be often unseen as a motivation. But when we really slow down, then we see actually my house is not so stable as I thought. You know, if we can be really quiet and silent, and if we can really be active and out there, and it really is a fluid capacity in myself, then it doesn't matter. Then I will be regulated. But if I have to run, because when I stop, I will actually feel scared. And then I see, wow, I'm actually, even if I have more and more and more, that fear is still there. And I think also with technology, like that we see technology also needs a vessel. It needs to be grounded in order to serve humanity well.
Right, right.
And that grounding is an important aspect in the spiritual evolution, in the psychological evolution, in the way of well-being and in our body, but also in the cultural evolution, that up and down stay synchronized, so that we are healthily connected to our aspiration, to innovation, you know, to the new downloads that excite all of us, everybody in their own fields. But when we have this, like you and I had this many times, that when we talk, like there is this kind of excitement, you know, being mutually inspired, and that's perfect. And I think that we need this and a lot of it. At the same time, like we also need to ground it, because it needs to be in relation to nature. Like grounding also means nature. Grounding means our relation to our natural environment, the planet, and so on. And I think if we, and often in crisis situations, as you said, the pause button is also it's kind of a reorganization in the system to create more of this. And I think that's also partly what we are seeing. That's more the philosophical part, but that I want to say this because otherwise, if it needs to be really respectful of what's actually currently happening. And
that's right.
You know, when you read the reports of a doctor that was published recently in Italy, it's important to be aware of that too. That there is many places a very intense situation that, you know, affects all of us potentially.
It's like a war zone in northern Italy. It's horrible, and it was like that in China too.
Right.
And we are assuming in Israel and the United States, where we are, that most of our friends are dealing with precautions rather than emergencies. But that may change, and we don't know how fast. The human imagination doesn't keep up with exponential growth, but exponential growth is how epidemics, you know, the curve goes up very sharply at a certain point, like it did in Italy. And it might in the United States. There have been a lot of mistakes in the way the federal government managed things, no testing and things like that. So we have a lot of humility, and I think a kind of tenderness, that our fear puts us in touch with our vulnerability and our mortality, which is also a source of wisdom. So it's not, you know, like that wonderful line from Rumi, that whatever anger or even malice or whatever arises in your interior, greet it like a guest at the door, laughing, welcome it in, and appreciate that it has its function. So there's a kind of way that we're served, not just by the pause, but even by the upset that arises. It helps us to become more related to our actual experience. On the other hand, we're at a time in which the stress of the speeding up of life is perhaps the even more fundamental epidemic, the epidemic of fear, or the epidemic of a cognized separation, and uh, that building up of that energy in the nervous system. So I feel called upon to relate very compassionately to the fear and the confusion and even the unhealthy responses in other people, so that in a way, this metaphor of being a mother who is just loving and a father who is firm and holds to clarity, both at the same time, in relation to everything arising in us.
Right. Yeah, and as you said, like also when we honor all the people that are really going through difficult moments or very heroic moments, I'm sure that, in all the areas in China where people really, put so much effort in what they did, and however things worked out, and which mistakes have been made or not have been made, but at the end of the day, there was a real deep engagement and also a motivation to do the best. And I think that, and it's happening, I think, in many places right now around the world, and that we honor the people that are in the first line. And I think that's important internally, and also through small things we can do, maybe, or maybe some of us, that are the first line. That it's very important too. And I think that we don't forget that the like that we can trust, like, a resilience. It's not the first time that collectively we are going through kind of a crisis moment as humanity. So same as trauma transmits itself throughout generations and throughout time, to trust that, in our bodies, emotions, minds, societies, there is also the storage of resilience. Like, we are, all of us that are able to either speak now or listen to this now, are here because we survived many things. And we actually, in many ways, in many crises, also went through it, through creativity, through presence, through finding out innovative methods or ways how to do something when things were uncertain or not stable. And that intelligence of our ancestors sits in my cells too, and in your cells, and everybody's cells. So that we trust there is already a strength. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this conversation now. And
Right.
and I think that everything that led up throughout thousands of years of being human beings over and over and over and over again, is the crystallized intelligence that we have available too. And I think it's good to, yes, we are dealing with trauma and difficulties, and we are coming from a place of being resilient. And I think if we keep the relational flow, and making relation really a priority, because relation is, in a way, that which helps the system to be intelligent, because feedback, when we can stay in a way responsive and response able, able to respond, then the system has feedback loops. Like, every organism has feedback loops, and the better they work, and the more that inner data system can flow, it increases well-being. And I think also in the society, as long as we stay in feedback loops, we can reach out, we can give, we can respond, we can feedback to each other. And the better that system works, the system's resilience is growing. And I think we are that system. Nobody is ever outside of that system. We are that system. And I believe that system, with all its parts that are not working, is lovable.
That is such a big shift for so many of us. The frustrations everyone has with the way the system is eating the earth, or the way the system is unfair to the poor, or the way the system is racist, or the way the system has made women marginalized and traumatized, and all of the complaints we have with the momentums of everything not balanced or not just, to shift toward appreciating and loving the fact that it serves an absolutely irreplaceable function and we need it to be healthy. That's very deep, and I think maybe worth exploring a lot more. I want to just take that in and appreciate you and invite you to keep going.
That's lovely. Yeah, and I think, of course, that's what I'm saying. You said it, you mentioned it. There are many things, that every one of us sometimes doesn't get right. And there are many things where we sometimes hurt other people by what we say, by how we act, by what we do, by when we're too selfish, when we're, like, it's not just the system not working. Like, the system not working makes the outsider a perfect. And then I can criticize this when I'm outside of it. But when we are inside, we see that many of the tendencies that we see in the system, they're also living somehow in us, some of them stronger, some of them less strong. And I didn't say that we need to accept all of this and not even confront, because feedback is also sometimes confrontation. But feedback is confrontation in relation. That's I feel you feeling me. I feel you when I disagree with you. It's even harder to really stay in a relation with you, to be in a place that I can get your perspective and understand your perspective, even if I heavily disagree with it. But that's the fragmentation of the past. I mean, we practice this kind of either me or you so many times, and we saw how much pain it created, and all the social, issues and all the environmental issues. They are all very true, and we have to do something. But the question is just how we do that, what needs to be done, and how we step in. And if more polarization is helpful, that's a question. Maybe polarization is what created it in the first place. And so I think maturity and wisdom and really agency to step into something and go for something, but in a related way, I think these are human qualities. And if you look at some of the kind of real heroes of the past, what are the people that come to mind that really went for something in a kind of a sense of good? And these were people that were very dedicated. They gave their whole life for it. Like, they were really aligned with their mission. So if environment is our mission, I'm saying, yes, let's do that, but let's do it in a way that can spread coherence and bring in the parts that seem separate from it. And I think that's also a learning process, maybe, that the cause and the symptom, they belong together. And maybe we need to, in order to change the symptom, we need to also change the cause. And I think that's what we are up against now. And maybe we are not up against it, but maybe that's our calling.
Yeah, I'm hearing all of this as I integrate something deeper in my own psychic body of appreciating. I so want to see the system evolve. I so want it to be less brutal and more sustainable. So many, less destruction, all of that. That I'm not in the habit of noticing how much it sustains and how much I depend on it, and open to appreciation and gratitude and even a kind of care for it. And even and that in a way my fundamental motive for wanting to see it change is my care for all of those that it holds and sometimes hurts. And that, and that, there's a saying about revolutions, when the social disorder begins, when there's no longer a civil order, they say the intellectuals are the first to go. And maybe even the mystics are also in that category. So there's a vulnerability potentially of the things I value the most, and that's being defended by the system. And so my way of relating to my care for there to be an evolution, rapid social transformation, which we do need in order to become sustainable, that it is genuinely a caring and constructive, that the subtle difference between the deconstruction, it's like you get a pleasure in tearing something down, or you get a pleasure in breaking something up because you're coming from a place of anger and separation. And so much of the rhetoric comes from that place. And it's been interesting for me to notice how out of sympathy I feel, even though my background is more, I was raised in a cooperative dedicated to civil rights and peace, and so it's more of a left, in the politics of the United States, more of the left wing, but I'm not so sympathetic with a quality of irritation, anger, finger pointing, blame, that even though many of the adjustments that people are pointing to are healthy, good things. And it might be that at times there is a fight over which direction things go, and it's important to fight and succeed. And so it's not as if every description of a fight is all poison, and we could be somehow pure of entering into a fierce negotiation and really wanting a certain outcome. But to be rooted in the care for the system and to, in a sense, love the system, even as I so profoundly want to see it change. This is really, I'm noticing an energetic shift, because although I guess I was naturally not so in sympathy with the negativity, this affirmation of loving the system is really landing as a catalyst for something useful for me. I'm really appreciating that.
Yeah, because the system is life. It's like we are all leaves on the tree of life. So the system is life. But like in a good integration session, the integration doesn't happen by pointing at the thing that is dysfunctional. The integration happens by being clear, because conscious awareness says, I'm conscious, and that's why I'm not going to support certain aspects that are not healthy. That are not healthy for an individual, that are not healthy for the society. So that's very good, to be really clear with what we support and what we invest our time, energy, life into, and what not, is very important. And also that real constructive conflict, or that we are not shying away from conflict, as you said, that's very important. It's not like just throwing cotton balls, but it's like it can be very strong and clear, but related. And I think that's often what gets lost. In polarization, we are already part of the fragmentation without knowing it, and we think we are right. Mm-hmm. When there's a valley between us, both think they're right. And that's what creates a stagnation, because we don't recognize that we are both functions of a fragmentation. And I think that fragmentation might be within us, or it might be also a systemic fragmentation that lives also in us. And so once I find myself in this kind of polarized view, I'm actually investing energy in the stagnation. It looks like I'm very passionate and I see it very different than you, Terry, and I kind of, but it looks very strong, but it might just reconfirm the fragmentation that speaks through me. And that's very powerful. Whereas if I'm aware of that fragmentation, I am aware of what's really, where we are really headed and what's really needed, but it's a process that can reduce the fragmentation and increase the coherence. And I think that's important. And I think that's important in the next weeks or months to come for every one of us. How can we increase and support coherence, resilience, relation, awareness, presence, support, practical daily life support? How can we protect the people that really need to be protected, that are very vulnerable to the coronavirus? How can we create systems in families and with friends that are very supportive of one another? In companies, how can we really, as long as it's possible, to really support each other? And I think there are many things we can do that increase systems coherence and don't allow the fear to go down in a negative spiral. I think that's what we are being called to.